All right. Let's get moving. Good evening. This is W2NDG Whiskey 2 November Delta Golf from Highland, New York, specifically Elting Corners, if we want to get that specific. Anyway, we meet here on the repeater of the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club on 146.805 kilohertz every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Make sure that you have a negative shift of 600 kilohertz set and a PL tone of 103.5 hertz. Sorry, stumbling on my own words a little bit here. I'm running around the house trying to find my favorite pen, and I found it. Anyway, so we meet here and we discuss things related to science and technology, not always related to ham radio. Tonight's topic will bring us into the ham radio realm eventually, but we're going to be very general with what we're talking about. So, should be some fun, and we'll see how this goes tonight. Tonight is number 41. I forget when we actually started this. I know we're probably pretty close to a 1-year anniversary, or maybe have surpassed it. I have to take a look, but at some point I'll look back and see when number 1 was. We're going to be possibly skipping a couple coming up because I'm going to be out for a little bit, but we'll definitely keep everybody informed through the other nets on this repeater and our Groups.io page and Facebook page as well. So, what are we doing tonight? I put the name up on the Facebook page as There's Trouble. Let's shoot it. So, that's the topic of troubleshooting, but in a more general format. So, and then we can get more specific as we get into it. Well, I'm usually joined by my partner, sidekick, and scientific expert, Jim, K2BHM. Let's see if Jim's there tonight.
He got it better off and moved on. Well, I'm here, Neil, K2BHM.
He's lecturing on the merits of panoramic bite stick covers.
I resemble that.
Oh, it is, it's a small world. It really is. What are the chances of that crossover between our two careers and hobbies?
Well, with that in mind, I propose a showdown. We both repairing equipment for, more use than we want to admit. You're more towards the software in your profession, and even though I'm retired, I kind of specialize more in the hardware. So let's have a showdown on what are the different techniques that you use, and what tools do you have in your toolbox when you're doing a software issue or hardware issue.
Well, there you go. And we definitely all have our methods. I basically, you're right. When I get a call at work, to figure something out, that's a question. What do I bring with me? And I can definitely get into that. It's not a big deal if I have to go back to my desk, but sometimes it can be a pain. I have to traverse a couple of streets to get over to one of our research buildings. And it can take a good, 10, 15 minutes to get back to my desk, and then 10, 15 minutes to get back over to wherever I was again. It's not a lot of time, it's not a lot of effort, but it's a waste of time. So I'm better off showing up with everything I need. If I'm down in the dungeon, as I call it, sometimes I'm masked, gloved, and double gowned. It's kind of a pain in the neck to get in and out of the airlocks, get all that stuff off, and then get it back on again if I forget something. So, yes, tools. Tools for the job, proper tools for the jobs. Um, can you use a screwdriver as a hammer? Certainly. Does it work well? Nope. Are you going to break something in the process of doing that? Quite possibly. But, it's it's a matter of bringing what you think you may need depending on what the call entailed. And one of the other things to consider along those lines, I have a comment here in YouTube. It says, depends on the type of service you're going to, I assume they mean to do, and on what tools you need. Yes, definitely. Of course. I mean, if I'm dealing with a computer that simply won't turn on versus one that's in the process of blue screening, it's two different things, and it may bring different tools. So, good point. All right. So we have Jim, K2BHM here. I think we'll take some check-ins, and then Jim and I will throw some ideas back and forth. But let's see if anybody else is out there who wants to participate tonight and check into the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net by giving me your call sign, your name, and your location. Please come now.
WA2RKN, Jerry, Hyde Park. This is KD2TVS Lou, West Milford, New Jersey. This is KB2 GGS, Matt in Kerhunction.
All right. We have the usual suspects. Thanks, guys. And, a lot of this relates, we can look at this group right here and can say to ourselves, all right, we all deal with different sorts of things in our jobs and in our hobbies. But this group that checked in, we've all, I believe, had technical careers of some kind, and different enough that Jim's toolkit in the major part of his career versus Jerry's toolkit during what he did for a living, or Lou's toolkit doing what he did for a living versus Matt's doing what he did for a living. And there's definitely differences in what we would carry walking into a problem. I would have to think there's definitely overlaps there. Of course, there are overlaps, but we're looking at different things. The most different one here would probably be Lou. I think the tools that Lou would carry to do troubleshooting would be a lot different than what Jerry or Matt and I would carry. There's probably more crossover between Lou and Jim, actually, in some of the mechanical things. But it's going to be interesting. And I'm not sure where to go with this, but there's definitely some basic concepts of troubleshooting that apply to whether you're fixing an airplane, a radio, a computer, or a nuclear reactor. I think there's basic concepts here that we should probably talk about. Let me throw it over to Jim for some ideas.
K2BHM. Well, we were in different avenues because you're more software and I'm more a hardware guy. I could be working on a tank or a truck or a CNC machine or whatever, X-ray system, but you're more into the software routine. So it's kind of a different realm, but basically, from my standpoint, the first thing you do is you go to the person that operates it every day and say to them, hey, what's it normally do and what's it doing that's different? And 99% of the time, they'll stick your nose right in the problem. Now, in your case, there might have been a software update that happened last night that nobody had any control over. It just happened and it blew everything out of the water. And now you're up to trying to figure out what happened with no clue, and nobody has a clue. So mine's probably a lot easier than yours.
I do get into the mechanical, but not. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's mostly software on my end, but we do have to get into the mechanical end of it as well. There's definitely things that can go wrong. More comments from, I believe this is RWW, and he says at work he has several bags that he's prepared depending on the call. If he's working on a radio call, he has an RF equipment he brings. If it's a networking issue, he brings cables, laptops, memory sticks, cable testers for Fox and the Hound, and I can explain that. If it's an electronics issue, he says we might bring an oscilloscope, definitely a voltmeter to every call. Yes. And that's one of those basic things. And it's surprisingly something you don't see a lot. Oh, that's right. It's not RWW. It's Aaron, KC2NDA. Thank you, Aaron. I can't hear the voice. Sometimes I get messed up. But yes, and I know Aaron is in one of those environments where he's pretty much trying to repair anything and everything. So he gets a little more diverse than I do. Let me drop. But yeah, I should carry a voltmeter to every single call. I don't, because there's other ways I can test the basics of what I'm trying to find out with a voltmeter. But one of the first things, is attacking the simple and the mundane. No matter how much you think the user or operator or whoever called in whatever issue you're dealing with, no matter how simple you think the problem, could be that they would already have looked at that. You can't assume that. You have to look at every possible little thing. And sometimes people get upset when you ask them the silly questions. And this goes back to something I was mentioning to Jerry sometime in the last week when I was chatting with him on the repeater. Let me drop. A famous British comedy show called The IT Crowd. And the line from the IT Crowd is, every time the phone rings and they answer it, "Hello, IT, have you tried turning it off and back on again?" And, it's a joke in the show and it's funny, but it's the first thing you're going to ask in the case of not just computers, but so many things that are resolved by turning them off, turning them back on again. And to this day, it still happens to me where people haven't tried it. I handle some pretty sophisticated stuff where I work, and I had basically the technical lead for a department that has a brand new director. And the head of this department, who's just started recently, is using one of my cloud storage systems heavily leaning on it. And it was malfunctioning. It wasn't working the way they wanted. And I got a very lengthy explanation from the person taking care of them with a whole description of what was happening and a screenshot of the error they were getting. And I, in turn, responded with a rather technical list of things that they could try. And in the response to that, I was told, okay, well, I don't think she's tried rebooting yet. So If that doesn't fix it, I'll let you know if anything else is going on. And I hadn't even put that into my list of things to do. Um, and it's just funny because they called even before they had tried that. But yes, um, that's one of them. I'll give you one more. My first days in IT support in 1999, when I started doing it for a living anyway, you'd get a call from somebody who would say they couldn't get a picture on their computer. The screen won't come up. And when they turn the monitor off and on, they get a thing on it that says no signal. Now, I know what's going on, whether it's a dead video card, dead computer, or something else. We don't know. I mean, we might have to physically look at it. But frequently I would say, have you made sure that the computer is plugged in to the monitor correctly? Because frequently people won't turn those thumb screws that hold that cable in all the way in, and they can fall out. A lot of people get lazy and just stick the cable on there and say, well, seems to fit. I don't have to bloody my knuckles trying to turn these screws here, which sometimes they're in the worst possible position, but you do need to tighten those things, because frequently when I would say that to somebody, they'd be like, well, of course it's plugged in. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. No, that could be the problem. And you get that a lot. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is always start with the most basic, mundane things. I have a brother who is probably one of the best auto troubleshooting people that I know. He's not a mechanic by trade, but he can run circles around a lot of them. And he is one of the best diagnosticians you'll ever meet with almost anything mechanical that he knows something about. But when it comes to cars, oh yeah. And but he'll always tell you, if you're trying to figure out what's wrong with something, start with the simple, start with the inexpensive. If it's going to cost you $5 here and $5 there to try things, whether you think, well, maybe that's not what, don't just try it. Try the simple and inexpensive stuff first, because if you try the $300 solution first and it doesn't go anywhere, you're going to feel really silly. Let me throw it over to Jim here. W2NDG.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. You had me laughing. In the industry, there's something called the Siemens fix. When you run into a problem with the system and you cycle power, normally people would go off, on, wrong, off, count to 10, and then back on. Give the capacitors a chance to settle down and get a full reset and so forth, because those capacitors on the reset line may not dump in 1 second. But if you've got a piece of Siemens equipment, the general rule of thumb is turn the switch off, go have a cup of coffee, take a break, come back in 15 or 20 minutes later, and turn it back on again. And 90% of the time, you'll solve the problem. The Siemens fix. Back to you.
I got a couple of comments on that. The capacitor reset, yeah, definitely. And in the computer world, and this does work with other devices as well, one of the best ways to make sure that you're getting that proper reset is to make sure that the system is completely drained of voltage. And what'll happen sometimes, and some of you may have run into this, and I do run into it, is you'll have a computer or a computerized device that simply won't turn on. And what's happened is sometime around, it was basically when we went to what they call like the AT series cases on computers, and that power button on the computer changed from a mechanical on-off button to what we call a soft button. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Night. And what that means is that in the earlier computers, you were literally opening or closing a connection that usually controlled a relay in the power supply, but sometimes it was more drastic. On some of those old IBM XTs and clones, if you remember, the power button was, you felt like when you went to, turn it on, you should speak in a Boris Karloff voice. Should I throw the switch? They were heavy duty, and you were actually controlling the power with that switch. That changed with AT style computers and others that came after that. It's just a momentary switch that sends a signal to something in the power supply that's intelligent, usually actually through the motherboard in most cases on a computer, and it's saying the switch was pressed, change state. So if the state is that the system is currently off, then it's going to turn it on. And if it's already on and it senses that you pressed that button, it's going to change state again. And now the state that it changes to once the system is already on is actually based on settings in your operating system. In a lot of cases, you can say, okay, if the computer is on and somebody presses the power button, shut down safely, or go to sleep, or hibernate, or, do nothing, which happens. And you'll see that. So it's now no longer a mechanical open connection, closed connection, switch. It's not a single pole double throw switch or single pole single throw switch. It's not just a simple on-off switch anymore. And what you need to do sometimes, if it stops working, is unplug all of the power from the computer. If you're dealing with a laptop, take the battery out of it. I know with a lot of newer laptops, you can't do that, unfortunately. But in the ones where you can't remove the battery, they're usually set up where a certain key sequence or just holding the power button in for a certain amount of time will disconnect the power circuit and drain all of the voltage out of the system. But in anything where you can remove the battery, can remove it from power completely, do that. Hold the power button in. I always tell people 10 seconds. 5 may do it, but what will happen if you unplug like a large Dell, tower computer from power and then hold the power button in, interesting thing will happen if you're looking at it while you do it. The power light will come on. You're not even plugged in and you're seeing LEDs. So that shows you, yes, there's still voltage on the motherboard. So you hold that power button in until that light shuts off again. If you're looking at the motherboard, you'll see some other things going on. You'll see other LEDs light up. You may see the CPU fan spin and then stop spinning at a low speed. But whatever it is, hold that power button in for 10 seconds with nothing connected, no power, and then give everything a try again. And that's one of those basic things. Let me comment on Siemens, though. As I mentioned earlier tonight, Jim and I at one point did work for very similar industries. And I was, even though I didn't ever service dental equipment, I worked for a company that did and had to, know how things worked and what things meant and who to call and what to say when things broke. And one of the hardest companies to deal with in that business was always Siemens. And it was funny because the attitude that was always taken anytime you called in for technical support, if we couldn't figure out something ourselves, was, what is the customer doing wrong? That's always where it started. My other comment is I see the Siemens name where I work now at Sloan Kettering on computers. And it's kind of funny because Siemens doesn't make computers. At least they don't now. They put their name on computers. What computer did they put their name on? Fujitsu Esprimos. Probably the most convoluted, crazily engineered, complicated, ridiculous computers I've ever had to work on. And Jim, I'm sure you will agree, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, but did they have to make them to Siemens specs?
Well, considering that it was Zeiss microscope systems that were using them, and they had some kind of crazy setup where the Windows system was on the C drive, but the profiles under the user directory were under a D drive, which is sometimes a separate drive, sometimes just a partition. And then there was a disconnected, not SD card, not solid state drive, but compact flash drive in the system for restoring it to its crazy and convoluted state if something broke.
Let's see if I got it. The nuclear medicine chambers that I worked on, they were run on Sun Sparks on Sun OS, which was basically Unix. And the hardware was actually driven by a 286. And the C drive on the 286 was a partition on the Sun drive on Unix. And so the 286 didn't have a hard drive itself. It had a floppy disk that gave it enough intelligence to realize that the C drive was someplace else and went out and found it and so forth and got it up and running and whatever. And it got crazy from there. And it was such that timing parameters and stuff like that, when the 286s went out of fashion and the 386s came in, the system went crazy. We had to put 286 motherboards back in. A 386 wouldn't work. So it was a weird time.
They are a strange company. Aaron's added a couple of things here. He said one of the best pieces of equipment he ever used from Siemens was a rugged COM Ethernet to serial converter. Interesting. I haven't dealt with those that much. Actually, I did a long time ago when I was working for AOL, all places, but I haven't had to deal with them since. They are a very particular company, and it seems like most of the things they get into are just frequently over-engineered, but well built. Aaron also adds that he had a Linux web server that had video issues, found 10 bulged capacitors on the video card and 15 on the motherboard. We were just talking about this recently, and that's a power related thing. But he only discovered it after a power outage was found. There was a period of time when they started shrinking computers, making the cases smaller, that there were a lot of poor quality capacitors produced, and it was just a bad combination of two things: computers getting smaller and poor quality caps. So you had hotter environments. It was harder to cool these things because they took up less space. They were more compact inside, and we were using terrible capacitors. And there were a whole series of computers, including some class action suits for getting things replaced out of warranty, where that stuff was failing. But it simply presented itself, as either a power problem or just random system lockups that weren't producing error logs. And anytime I run into that, it's one of the first things I look for. But anyway, I think we'll go around here. We have 3 people who checked in after Jim. And then when we get through those 3, we'll see if there's anybody else out there. But I think what I'm looking for is, give me the basics for things that you have been troubleshooting, either in your career or your hobby. What's the first things that you look at? And give me a story, either about, a time when you forgot to check the basics first, or when, you had somebody who didn't, and you saved the day by doing something really simple and mundane. I mean, it's all out there. It could be anything related to what we've been talking about so far, but I want to hear your stories. Jerry, WA2RKN, I'm sure you've got some good ones.
Greetings. Yeah, well, I may have, but memory is this fleeting thing, and it's been some decades since I left the field. Troubleshooting. Oh boy. Yeah, the resetting the computer kind of deal. that since you shut the power off, then like you mentioned, you got to wait a bit, give the capacitors time to drain. You knew that everything was reset rather than just depending on the reset line, pushing the buttons. Problems. I've worked both on the hardware and the software side of the mainframes. One problem I can remember, can't remember the base problem, but remembered that this symptom was described in a technical note to the field that you needed to install a patch to the microcode on the mainframe. And one day I got a call, and I was working in like the 8:30 shift, so this account was halfway down the Taconic to New York City, also an internal account. Get down there, verified the symptoms as what had been reported by the call dispatcher, and pulled the diskette out of the mainframe and verified that they did not have this particular patch installed. So basically, there was really nothing I could do other than to order them another diskette so that they could, in the future, install it. On the software side, it was basically a symptom fix kind of deal. Customer would call in, they would talk to level 2 on the phone, saying, "Here's my problem." Level 2 would do a quick search in the database to see if they had a symptom match, recommend a patch. Failing that, it'd throw it over the fence to us, level 3, and usually it would start off, verifying the symptom.
Timeout.
Good thing I did drop.
We only lost about 5 seconds.
Okay, we'd do another quick database search to verify, that we didn't have a fix already. And then we'd start with the basics. Okay, send me the dump when you get the hit. The system crashes, and it will automatically produce a dump of core, so we can trace back and see where the code was running, what was executing, and we'd take it from there. We'd walk through the code dump when we got it, find the control blocks, see what was going on, and go into the code, and like that. If it was a emergency situation, a code A situation, we would write them a patch, ship it off to get them running, while we threw it over the wall to the developers for an official fix. Considering that there may be other concerns that we were not aware of, maybe it had interactions other places. And sometimes the failures were such, let me drop. Sometimes the failures were such that we had to cut up a custom patch just to take a dump to get the information that we needed. That was always fun. And a quick comment, hardware side again. The first call that I took out in the field was for a printer problem, one of the big 1403 line printers. And intermittent problem, sync checks, indicating mismatch between the electronics and the position of the print train. Okay, intermittent. Well, didn't fix it. Couldn't get it through to fail, and so that was the end of that call. And then the very last call I took in the field, 13 years later, was the same printer with the same problem. And I finally found the problem. Someone had done an engineering change on the machine. Let me drop. And instead of removing a wire, they had merely cut the wire on one end. And so what had happened is they had an antenna connected to one of the nets. And whenever there was enough random RF, it would push the circuit into the proper state and cause the problem. WA2RKN, back to that.
That's where you can apply some of the RF training. Interesting stuff. I made a note here. The Poughkeepsie reset. It sounds like an urban renewal project. Wow. I sometimes you just have to try to, think what outside elements can cause something to happen as well. And that's, I had a client somewhere down in Westchester. Once again, it was my first, support job. I was working for a medical software company, and their computer would just get slower and slower during the day, and sometime mid to late afternoon would completely lock up, and they'd have to hold the power button and shut it off. And then when they started it back up, it was fine again. And most days it would happen. And when I went in to take a look at it, I asked the doctor, I was like, so this is pretty much every day? And he said, well, I forget which day of the week it was, but there was a certain day of the week where his front desk, person who did the billing and checking people in, checking people out, only worked, I think, 4 days a week. He had a different person at the front desk another day, and it wasn't happening when that person was there. So he said, I can't imagine what it could be user related that would cause it, but if that helps at all. So I said, let me come in, make sure I'm there the day that, the person who's having the problem is there, and I will just observe. And I told her, I said, not to be nervous. You're not doing anything wrong, but obviously there's a difference here, and we need to figure out what it is. And after watching her for 20 minutes, I figured it out. So the program I was supporting at that time was a DOS program, and it ran best full screen. But we were running it on Windows machines. And when you run a DOS program full screen in Windows, if the computer goes to sleep, or more appropriately, if the screensaver kicks in, it will minimize that full screen session and ends up down on the taskbar. And then you just retrieve it from there and go on. Well, every time this person was idle for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long the screensaver was set to kick in, or went out for a smoke, which was very frequent, or out to lunch, when she got back to the computer and woke the computer up, hey, my program's gone. I need to run it again. And by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she had about 40 of these things on the taskbar running. And the system just couldn't handle that many instances of this program, and it would slowly grind to a halt. But that's what it was. It was just somebody who was unaware what the taskbar is, what it means, and how to use it. So and the trick is to be diplomatic and teach somebody without making them feel, inadequate or defeated. But, it's just one of those things. Powers of observation. Anyway, good stuff, Jerry. I got thrown into some pretty crazy situations when we were upgrading some of these old mainframe systems. W2NDG for ID. And not understanding how they worked at all and needing to try to capture data off of them and everything before we shut them down and replace them with something more modern and much simpler. So it's even worse when you have no idea what you're looking at. Lou, KD2TVS, I know you've got stories.
Yeah, hi Neil. Hi everybody that's on the net tonight. Just sitting here and comparing your stories to my work history. So it's kind of very interesting. So, I mean, it's crazy. And you guys wouldn't believe me. You're talking about resets, about power on, power off. The newer airplanes, well, actually not newer airplanes, the 757 back from 1982, we all had that same issue that when they would tell us, hey, it's not behaving or it's giving you what we used to to call it nuisance messages on the screens with the reporting systems. We always had screens that told us, hey, you got faults here, faults there, and it's usually power it down, and if it came back up, then you knew you had a problem. If it didn't, you knew it was just a nuisance message. Let me just reset. In as far as tools, I guess, depending on where you were working, if you were working the flight line, so down at the terminal, we call it the line, you had your little line bag, and you just basically kept some basic tools in there, small, little ratchet set or pliers or whatever. The only thing you ever walked around in your pocket was probably a reversible screwdriver, which was Phillips on one side, Common on the other, flashlight, and channel lock pliers. I don't know if you got what they actually call them. Depending on what part of the country you went to, some people would call them channel locks. People would call them. I was surprised in Missouri actually to hear somebody call them a hog. So it was kind of funny about that, and like I said, we kept a little line bag or small toolbox at the line office, so we actually just kept them at the hangar and took them down with us, just in case you had something you had to, if you needed the heavy artillery because you changed it, usually the airplane's not being sent down to the hangar to get worked on, then it's up there, you go to the hangar, pick up your heavy artillery, come back up with it. Let me see, troubleshooting. Let me reset. It was always funny to hear all the old timers. I mean, I started working on airplanes back at TWA in 1978. And all the old timers, we're talking about when we had those airplanes, we started on 27s, DC-9s, L-1011s, and I worked DC-10s that TWA didn't have. I worked them for somebody else, and 7.4s. So they were an old generation of airplanes. I mean, the DC-10s and the L-1011s were quite modern compared to the other airplanes, where basically you learned a lot of your troubleshooting skills from a lot of the old timers, unless sometimes, mostly because you hung around with them on the line, and sometimes you had to know some knowledge of the systems if you didn't know them exactly, because otherwise you had to sit in front of the microfiche machine and look up troubleshooting information. Let me reset. So as the airplanes got more modern, I guess the 757, 67 came out in 1982 when TWA got them. They used to come with something called a FIM, or fault isolation manual, which made everything way so easy to troubleshoot because they had troubleshooting block diagrams. If you got a certain message on it, there was a certain chapter, I think 88 chapters they used to call them. And you look in that chapter and you look for that fault, and they go a detailed block diagram. Check this first. If you're getting this message, do this. Yes or no, which one happens, go to the next block, and you finally got to the point. It even got to the point that was actually pretty good because they were telling you to check for really got complicated voltages of certain pins and certain connectors. But it worked excellent. And let me see. Yeah, the old timers, their favorite saying, kids, keep it simple, stupid. And I remember an old avionics lead that we had at JFK, and he was ranting and raving. I was working sheet metal shop at the time, but I just happened to used to walk in there and say good morning to him and he was carrying a tantrum that day because he had another guy that actually started about the same time I did, started as a metal man, but went over to avionics. And they had a temp sensor on one of the airplanes on the engine for oil temp. And these guys, there was him and another guy, they were proceeding to actually bring up the wiring diagrams, just go out there, voltmeters and everything, common sense? Where did everybody lose their common sense? Just go get a sensor, put it in, run the engine, and see if it works. But sure enough, that's what it is. After they spent a couple of hours, I think, chasing down wires and looking for breaks in the wiring. And I mean, I saw a lot of the evolution of these airplanes. I remember if we're looking at instrument landing systems. I mean, back in the day, even those of the DC-10s, anytime you worked on the instrument landing system, the pilots, you had to placard the airplane so the pilot would do a instrument landing system. Just a flight. He's gonna fly so close to the ground, and it's usually in good weather, so the airplane can maintain its auto flight capability. Otherwise, it couldn't be done. But in today's airplanes, you have what they call land verifies on the Boeings and return to service on the old MD-80s, which actually was fascinating to me because, I mean, you could sit in the pilot seat as long as it just follow what the screen was telling you, do this, do this, do this. And if everything was good, it'd tell you test pass. Let me just reset. Plus, a lot of these boxes had what they call bite in them, which was built-in test equipment. And so basically, you could just, on the face of the box in the electronics compartment, was push a button in the bite, and it go through its little dance, and it gave you a green light, and that box is good. We don't have to worry about that one. So a lot of that was interesting with that. And the worst thing was going to school sometimes back in the old days, because you'd have a couple of the old radio guys or the electricians, and they start going into circuitry on some of these boxes. And the AN gates and the OR gates, and we used to go like, listen, this is not going to help us fix this airplane when it's on the gate when we're past this, ready to go. We're not going to open these boxes anyway. We're not allowed to. It's just going to swap out a box. But it was interesting back in the day with that. Another thing that helped a lot was that I learned about was trend monitoring. And it's actually done with an additional VHF radio. Most airplanes have VHF 1, VHF 2. But what they did when they added a system called ACARS, which is Aircraft Something Reporting System, added an extra VHF radio. And what it was is the airplane's in constant communication with home base, I guess, through the radio to ground and towers, and it gets moved around, and it gets sent to engineering for the airline. And gives them all kinds of crazy parameters, I guess, and they know what exactly to look at when they see an engine doing certain things. They may call out, change this part. So you're doing kind of preventive maintenance from the information that you know, so you don't wait for it to break down before you change something. And I mean, for engines, and even they can actually go and tell you, well, they know exactly if the airplane is actually consuming more fuel because there's a flight control that's out of rig and it's causing extra drag on the airplane. But I'll leave it at that for now. And another one that I took down was that you guys would be surprised to know that on a 777 airplane, let me just reset. Was one of the big ones that came in with something called a MAT, which was a maintenance access terminal, and it was based on a 386 motherboard, and through that MAT you can actually test everything on that airplane just from a maintenance access terminal. They had one up on in the cockpit, and they usually had one down in the electronics compartment. So that made a lot of testing a lot easier. So back to you, Neil. 82 TVS.
Well, I knew you'd have some good examples. I made a couple of notes here. I think I would definitely be concerned if I was, riding along in the sky and had the pilot come on and say, folks, we're going to need to reboot the plane here. I had a train conductor when I was, for a while, I was riding Jersey Transit sometimes out of Harriman. And that line, the Port Jervis line, had trains that the Jersey Transit had purchased for that line specifically from Alstom, I think was the company. And it was when they were going through some huge corporate changes, they had ordered these trains, and then the company basically changed hands or got taken over. And the trains had some issues, mostly at the announcement system and the station display system just didn't work. And when I asked the conductor one time, I was like, it's basically announcing the wrong stations, and he said, yeah, I know. And he said, one of the issues is that they couldn't really turn it off because it took too many other important systems with it if they deactivated it. And I was like, wow. I said, and you can't get it to work right? And he said, we can. He said, you have to reboot the train. And I'm like, so what's the issue with that? And he said, it's a complete reboot. It takes a long time. That's basically how he put it. And he said, eventually they'll fix this. But for now, all of these trains that run this line have that same problem. And when it gets out of whack, that's the only way it can be fixed. So I thought that was interesting. You're talking about channel locks. I have a lot of people who carry them, refer to them as pump pliers. Definitely a useful tool. I bought a whole set of them in different sizes. But yeah, when I'm going off to fix something at work, most of the time it's, something that won't boot or something that's crashing or something that's not accepting a piece of hardware that's being plugged into it, whatever it is. I usually head out with my laptop, a network cable, a network adapter, and a pocket full of USB drives. If it's a power problem or I'm, changing parts in a system, I'll throw one of those interchangeable double-end screwdrivers in my back pocket. But there's not much else I need to carry. My own radio beeped, but I don't know if I timed out. I don't think I did. But yeah, I'll throw one of those in my back pocket, and every now and then, if you're dealing with a system that just won't turn on, I do have a little pocket voltmeter I can carry with me, but it's rare we need them. But that's all that basic stuff. One thing I wanted to add before we go to Matt here, and I don't know if I'm the only one that notices this, but I feel like modern troubleshooters, modern mechanics, modern service people, as I don't know who's teaching the newer generations of repair people, but one of the things that I think is that we have more replacers than we used to have. I think they're just teaching people to find the faulty item and just replace it. And I think we've lost that ability to look for the cause. And too many times I find myself going back someplace to have something replaced again before I bring up, could you figure out why it's going bad, please? Because that's what we need to find out. And we do this with electronics. I had a TV where the power supply went bad. And when I was looking at the board, it was, I forget what part it was, a voltage regulator on the board had blown up. And there was like a black streak across the circuit board from where it had let loose. But something caused that to happen. It is possible it was a weak part. It's possible that just that part failed. But more times than not, something else failed that's not immediately apparent that caused that to fail. And I just feel like, especially with car repair these days, that something will break, they replace it, and then 2 weeks later it breaks again. And you go back and they replace it again. No, it must have been a faulty one. And then it breaks again. And, you go back in, and I just find myself saying, don't replace this again. until you figure out what's making it go bad, because the chances of having two in a row that were substandard were pretty slim. So anyway, Matt, your turn. Tell us a story, rant and rave, whatever you want. But you too were in a service-oriented business.
Thank you, Neil. Yes, at times it was very much service-oriented, and at times it was out in the plant, in the field plant, working on cable, so I didn't really see customers so often. But I did a lot of repair as well. But mainly I worked in cable, and when you were talking about Siemens, it reminded me of we used enclosures to enclose splices, which are outside in the weather, so they have to be watertight and vermin-proof and all like that. We used for large cables almost exclusively at one point in time Siemens cases, which were hard plastic tubes, split, and you could you set up end plates, which you have to cut with a very expensive and complex cutter from Siemens, overly complex. But once it was set up, it did a nice job, and very good cases, super high quality, and if you set them up properly, and they had big seals at the end with silicone rubber, and you had to silicone grease them properly, and blah, 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 blah. But once they were set up, they were very good because you could go in and out of them easily. And they were good in the manholes. They were steam-proof. They were salt waterproof. And you could get into them in 10 minutes, which, as opposed to the steel cases, which were all... Getting too detailed. Sorry. But anyway, they were good cases, but overly complex. That's the wind up with that. I used some very simple test equipment generally. I used a voltage ohm meter, which had a reversing switch, which would reverse the polarity on the clips rapidly. And with this, you could do a little pulse down a pair of wires and compare the capacitance on each individual conductor in the pair of wires. And by doing that, you could see where the break was, and if you knew the gauge of the wire, you could figure out the distance based on the pulse reading. So, it's just learning how to operate the test equipment was very important, and like that. So far as service-related type things, story I have is really pretty run-of-the-mill. Big cable going down Route 25A in between Syosset and Woodbury. I know you know where I'm talking about, Neil. And a restaurant caught on fire, and it burnt up the cable, which happened to be feeding a stock brokerage. And they were going absolutely insane. We had to... Let me drop it. It was, I believe, a 1200 pair cable, and we had to bridge on two sections, two pole runs of cable at one end, bridge that onto the existing cable, go to the other end, two sections down, bridge that onto the existing cable. Once it's all complete, we cut out the burnt section, we're back in business. Time consuming, in the middle of winter, really cold. And the stockbrokers were going insane because they were losing money. And guys in Armani suits were coming into my tent and saying, "I'll give you whatever you want. Make my phone work." And I said, "As soon as I can, man. You don't have to give me anything. I'm working on it, But, yeah. So there was some pressure there. But, basically it was, if you had access to good records and, you ran into the same things a lot of time. You look for weak points. You look for points of access where other people could have gotten in conveniently and messed with things, because that's where they'll go mess with things, where it's convenient. And things that are consumable, things that wear out, cords, plugs, connectors, that sort of stuff. So you just learn likelihoods, and you go with like you said, the simplest answer first, because often it is. So that's about all I have to add at this point. So let me send it back to you. KB2 GGF. Back to you, Neil.
make my stuff work. Yeah. And a part of this conversation is, remembering to look at the simple stuff. And that's basically where we are. There's some basic things I'll avoid sometimes. If you get a computer that just won't turn on and you've done that, power off reset like I described, you've plugged something else into the outlet to make sure that there's power coming out of the outlet. One of those things that never gets tried in the computing business, and I know, plenty of other businesses as well, is somebody will say the obvious thing, have you tried a different power cord? Well, no, most of the time we haven't, because power cords don't go bad, or do they? So usually if a power cord fails, it usually fails in some spectacular way, which usually involves an odor, sometimes a cloud of smoke, sometimes the smell of ozone, sometimes a blown breaker. Anyway, but usually when a power cord fails, you know it. There's some kind of physicality to it. But I've had it happen. I've had bad power cords. And you don't know what happened. The thing got pinched between the desk and the wall. Somebody ran over it with a chair. Once again, the chances of it going bad without it going bad in some sort of spectacular way are pretty slim, but it has happened. So, it's one of those things that sometimes I don't check. And I think the one time that I remember, and I think it's happened to me more than once, where I did have a bad power cord, it wasn't the first thing I checked. But as we run through all of these things, trying the simple, sometimes it's not, and we know this. Sometimes it's something that made absolutely no sense, but you just thought to try. What is the term? Occam's razor? And we hear it in the movies, science fiction movies, things like, basically when everything else has been ruled out, the only possibilities that remain, no matter how absurd, are probably what's wrong. And I've had it happen. So sometimes things don't make sense, but it's years of doing things and having a memory of it that make you sometimes the hero in a situation where nobody else knew what was going on. And sometimes it's just that chance that it happened to you before. I'll give one example, and we'll take some more check-ins, but on the next go around, we can talk about more complex things. A time that you ran into something that nobody else could figure out, you happened to figure it out because you either tried the unusual and the strange, or you'd run into it before. Here's mine. Frequently in Windows computers, not that frequently, but frequently enough that I've seen it more than once, you'll get a computer that starts up and it'll crash, and it'll tell you that it can't find a file. And it's usually a pretty basic file that's missing. So it'll say can't find system.sys or, windows.sys, or, it'll be a really basic file that it says is missing. And the gut reaction when you get this error is a disk problem. And I say the first time this happened to me, I started testing the disks. You run all sorts of diagnostics. This is why I have a pocket full of USB drives when I go out these days. Back then, it was a book full of CDs and DVDs, but they were environments to run a computer off of, so you could test something. You could test a hard drive while you're not using it. What's the theory here? Well, you can't change a tire on your car while you're driving it. So, similar analogy. But the first time, and probably the second time, because I didn't believe that it had happened again or didn't remember, you go through and you test the disk, and there's nothing wrong with the disk. It tests fine. Yet this error keeps happening. And in fact, if you try to restore the file that it says it can't find, then another basic file is suddenly missing, or that original file is still missing. What's happening? It's a memory problem. And what it is, and Windows isn't the only operating system that does this, when it first boots, it loads its basic functionality into the memory of the computer. There's some very basic things that load there, and they're the things that the computer is constantly touching and working with. It's the bootstrap. It's that basic boot information that kind of kickstarts your computer. And I'm not talking about the BIOS, but I'm talking about the real nitty-gritty, low-level files of your operating system. In Linux, it's the kernel. In Windows, it's system or registry. There's a lot of really low-level stuff that loads into memory when you first start a computer. And if the memory is bad, guess what? Those files load into memory and they can't be read. So this is what happens. And it's only after experiencing it more than once or twice that you think, let me run a memory test. So anyway, but that's my example of something that wasn't what it seemed. And, yes, we have Google for this stuff. But the funny thing is that at least back when it first happened to me, I don't know, the first few times, Google frequently will not give you the right answer because everybody always suggests the wrong thing first. So sometimes the right answer isn't out there easily. You got to really start digging down. That's another thing we could do one night is talk about advanced searching. I think people laugh at me when I tell them, or ask, do you know how to use Google? And people are like, it's like, do you know how to button your shirt? Do you know how to walk across a wooden floor? But do you know how to use Google? It's not just about typing a word and hitting enter. There's a lot more you can do with search engines than just typing in a word or two and hitting search. You can really narrow down and filter your results if you know how to use it and get rid of all of the chaff and flotsam and jetsam that you don't need and try to get what you actually do. Certain things you search for, you'll never get a good answer unless you really know how to weed that stuff out. So anyway, back up to Jim for some comments, and then we'll see if we have some more check-ins.
Well, Neil, I got a whole bunch of comments. Do you want me to go through them now, or did you want to organize them?
Oh, you can go through a few. Do some of it now. Freshen your mind, freshen our minds, and I'll take some check-ins, and then we can do more.
Okay, well, you talk about parts replacers. Okay, the fuse blew. I put a new fuse in. Okay, the fuse blew. I put a new fuse in. The fuse blew. What causes the fuse to blow? That's a good question that a lot of people don't really look into. And I ran into that back, about 40 years ago when I was working for the federal government, the Oilfield Arsenal milling machine. I was in NC Repair at the time. We repaired the computerized machinery. And this one guy got a call in that the circuit breaker kept on popping on the y-axis. And it'd be good for about, half an hour or so. And then all of a sudden it'd pop. And so the guy that was sent out on the job figured, well, okay, it's got to be a bad breaker. So he ordered up a new breaker, and it was a week or so afterwards it came in, he pops it in, and sure enough, half an hour later, the breaker pops. He dropped. So if you actually put an ammeter on it, there was a 15 amp breaker, and it would sit there at 1 amp or so, and then 2 amps, and then 3, and then 5, and then 7, and 9, and 10, and 12, and 15, and it dropped. And it took about a half an hour to get there. started changing things around and changing some ports out and so forth. And they changed the isolation transformers from the 440 line into the machine, and they got the drive company in to swap out the drive mechanisms, and no matter what they did, it would pop the breaker after about a half an hour. He drop again. So I happened to be on a night shift at that point, and they had everything ripped apart from the day shift, and nobody was around to talk to. So my partner and I, who were working the night shift, we went over just to nose around a little bit and check it out. And I grabbed a hold of the ball screw that this motor was driving that kept on popping the breaker, and I couldn't move it. I mean, you just couldn't twist it. It took a pipe wrench to break the thing loose. And then once it broke loose, you can go and twist it with two fingers. But we went off and did other things and came back a half an hour later, and you used a pipe wrench to break it loose again. The bearings were screwed up. So basically changed out the bearings, and all the electronic problems went away. So that's a good indication of checking to see what you got going on. Let me drop a second. And along your line of work, there was a guy by the name of Jeff at Sony that used to work for Dell, doing the factory repairs on computer equipment that Sony bought. And there was so many problems that Sony hired him. And so I would go down and talk to Jeff every so often down in his office. And I was down there one day, and the phone rings. PC support, Jeff speaking. Okay. Is the printer online? Is the online? Okay. Do you have a phone over by the printer? Okay. Go on over to that phone and call him back. Okay. So I'm sitting there watching, and Jeff hangs up. Let me drop. And so a minute or so later, the phone rings. Jeff picks up the phone and says, China Walk, I take the order. Click. A couple seconds later, the phone rings. China Walk, I take your order. Click. So he finally got through to the woman and talked her through it and so forth and so on. But he had a lot of fun with it. So anyhow, there's a couple more things here, but I'll let it go around and catch them on the next loop. So back to you, Neil. K2BHM.
We all have great stories like that. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else who would like to check in tonight and throw a troubleshooting story at us, or talk about the basics in your style or area of troubleshooting? Please come now with your call sign, your name, and your location.
One more before you go on.
Go ahead.
Did you ever run into this one? My cousin was IT for the state, and somebody called up and complained. This has got to be 20 years ago. It keeps on swallowing my disk. I keep on putting the disk in and it's gone. They were shoving the disk into the gap between drive A and drive B.
Yeah. Eventually, the computer's memory filled up.
Oh, God. And then one of the people at Sony would put the disk in, hit save, and click and take the disk out before it even got a chance to spin up.
Sometimes my sense of humor will come out when I'm dealing with, troubleshooting this or that. And I always have to remember that sometimes, the people you're dealing with aren't IT people, and sometimes they could be mildly offended by some of the things. But sometimes someone, will they'll hand me a hard drive, and there'll be a comment, discussion on something, Oh, this is a 5 terabyte drive we use in the lab. And I'll be like, is there data on it now? Do you need it rescued? Like, yeah, there's a lot on it. And I'll kind of weigh it in my hand up and down. You do that up and down motion. I'm like, oh, yeah, it feels like it's got a lot of data on it. And, a lot of times they don't laugh. That's one of those things. But we certainly have plenty of them that we'll mention. And, have you tried turning it off and back on again? And you have to say it in the same accent as the guy who does on the show, or else it's not as funny. So we see this in our own equipment, in our own radios. We're not all RF engineers, but we know the basics. We've all fixed radios by doing complete resets. Yes, Aaron, ones are heavier than O's. Yeah, data has weight to it. And there is some physical definition to that. But there are things in this world that work, and we don't know why they do. We don't know how they do. And sometimes when you look into what actually makes something do what it does, you're amazed that it works at all. I recommend that anybody look into the basic theory of how modern spinning voice coil hard drives work. Granted, more and more of our computers don't have hard drives in them anymore that actually spin, but look into how they work, what the process is, how many times they're reading over the same information to get it correct, what the gap is in the little tiny thin slice of air that head has to ride on in order to be able to read the surface of the disk and not damage it. Read up on it. Read up on how hard drives work. And it's just amazing that they actually do work. So a lot of stuff like that. We get sometimes we take a lot of this stuff for granted, and we live in a pretty amazing world. And technology, like I said, I work in technology because every day I read something that makes me say, "Wow, that's cool." All right, let's go back up to the top. Jim for any further comments, and then it'll be off to Jerry. So Jim first.
I've got comments, but save them for later on. They're more anecdotal.
All right, Jerry, WA2RKN. I think we'll make this the last round, and then a little open discussion at the end. But anything else for us, Jerry?
A couple things. The disk drive thing, we dealt with those, and those heads actually fly. There's an aerodynamic design they did to them. I'm not the engineer, but we're talking about the big iron stuff here. Disk drives that are maybe 18 inches in diameter, kind of deal. And occasionally, you'd have a head crash. Spectacular. Sparks fly, etc. And in really memorable cases, the support mechanisms, the arms that supported the heads and moved them across the disk, they would get so hot from friction. And of course, when you notice the problem with the drive and everything, you power it off. But they centers, the equipment's off in a corner, you don't notice it for a while, and they can get really, really hot. And some memorable occasions, they got so hot they actually welded to the discs. Pieces and parts flying. It winds up contaminating the voice coil motor, the actuator that actually moves the arms. That's about the voice coil is approximately 4 or 6 inches in diameter. Huge permanent magnet that it operated with. And the other thing is the cables between the mainframe and the channel, which was basically the control unit for the devices on the channel. You have the mainframe computer, which was cabled to the channel, and the channel was cabled to the control units for the devices, and the control units were cabled to the devices. Well, the cables from the computer to the channels, from one channel to another channel, needed to be terminated. You had a set of terminators that you would put in the last device. And I remember one call, beginning of the night, midnight, show up first call, oh yeah, you go out to, blah, 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 and work with blah, 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 which was the specialist, the guy that was, one of the top techs. We had a couple of them in the office. He was already there for second shift. Go out and work with him, okay, fine. Typically, you'd work together, and if you needed a part or something, you'd be the gopher. Did it again.
I don't think we lost anything.
We're working together, and another call comes in. We're spread thin. We have more calls, and we got bodies. So, okay, break off and take this other call. Okay. So we were troubleshooting an internet problem, and it didn't make any sense. This, that, the other. I've been poking him and saying to him, check the terminators. Check the terminators. Well, he kind of blows it off because, he's top dog. And away I go. I take the other call. And come to find out, sure enough, there were no terminators on the line. It's basically a byte interface, 8 lines. Each line has its own coax, etc. And they need to be terminated. Otherwise, transmission line, ringing, etc. So, random chance of what's going to fail, when it's going to fail, etc. Way too earthy and back to that.
All right, 2 comments here. The head crash. I had a hard drive fail spectacularly one time. And I think it was when I worked for EBS. That was the medical software company. We had a hard drive that I believe the order of things that happened is that the bearings went. And it seized the drive, which caused the motor, instead of just, blowing some sort of safety circuit, the motor fused the circuit, which didn't blow any breakers or or for some reason cause any fuses to blow in the power supply. It caused a straight short in the hard drive circuitry at the Molex plug on the motor side of things. The wires got so hot that the hard drive actually caught fire. So there was smoke coming out of the computer. They hit it with a fire extinguisher, and they put it out. When I got there to take a look at the thing, the Molex power plug had melted to the hard drive. So we had to cut the wires. So I cut them, terminated them, and guy's like, "Do you think it's still going to work?" I told him, I was like, I wouldn't expect that, but as long as you don't mind standing here with the fire extinguisher again, I'm game. So we plugged it in and fired it up, and it booted and said, missing operating system. Well, of course, the operating system was rather toasty. So I had spare hard drives, and the thing had spare power connectors, and amazingly enough, I was able to get them back up and running. I told them that I would seriously, immediately look for a replacement computer because I was very, very concerned about the build quality of the thing. Even though, yes, it ended up being very durable. No, it wasn't very safe. Let me drop. My first experience with networks that required terminators was also in that same job. We were doing 2 base T or 2 meg networks with, hey, 50 ohm RG cables. In fact, some of my BNC 50 ohm cable came from old networks like that. But yes, it was BNC connectors. That's what the Ethernet cards were in the back of the machines, and it was a ring network, or at least the line would go to a computer, and then it would go out of the computer into the next computer, then out of that computer into the next computer. And when you got to the last computer in the line, you had to terminate that connection, or things wouldn't work properly. So yes, but we were in the process of switching over to Cat 5 at the time, 10 meg networks, and slowly got away from that. But we had a medical office that was attached to a hospital by our software. Basically, you're installing, basic PCs. At the time, they were Pentiums, probably Pentium 2s, Pentium 3s, depending on what vintage this was, running Windows 95 version 2 or 98, and at the time running a DOS program within Windows, because that's what we did. And the networking was pretty simple. And I remember the office, I think it was a 3-computer install. So one computer acts as the, de facto server. It's where the database lived. And then the other 2 kind of slaved off of it. But they had run Ethernet cable, and we installed a network switch. And I set the whole thing up. But they wanted me to take, they needed one mainframe machine, which is the way they used to use it. They were piggybacked on the hospital system. They needed one to remain, and they had 2 others that they wanted removed. They asked me if I could, take them down and just put them over in the corner, and the hospital would pick them up. I'm like, okay. So I unplugged everything. And one of the things that I had to unplug, W2NDG on the OMARC, Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. One of the things I had to unplug was a cable that was the size of a garden hose. And I'd never seen anything like it before, but I said, okay, that must be how it gets its information from the hospital. And I undid the cable, and there were actually 2 cables going into this, the back of this terminal. So I undid both of them. And then I went over, did it to the other machine, and piled everything in the corner like they said. And then within about 10 minutes of me doing this, somebody came knocking on the door. Well, I had brought down every mainframe terminal in that wing of the hospital, basically, because those were pass-throughs. And once after the first few people came to the door and asked if we had, if our computers were still working, and I said, well, I'm in the process of uninstalling them, they called their IT department, and a guy showed up with these little end-to-end pass-through connectors so that everything could still function. But I brought that whole wing down. Lots of fun. Anyway, garden hose. That's what it looked like. I know it wasn't. KD2 TVS, Lou. Anything else for us tonight?
Oh yeah, I can keep it going all night. I got a couple of little extra ones. According to things you mentioned before about, I think you termed it a little different. inkling or the want to actually read and try to find out why things were happening instead of just changing the part and it worked. Right? No problem. It's good. So, but things got better over the years. I guess I forgot to mention that we at a point of probably I guess about 10 years ago, maybe something like that. We finally got our first. We finally started going up a lot paperless on maintenance records, and you probably guys would think everything that you do to an airplane is written up as per FAA regulations, and it's actually it's all basically documented on computers, which is the easiest way because anytime that something drops in our lab, we can go and look at maintenance history and see what the last couple of times what was done, what parts were changed, the part number, serial number, if something came up with one in particular. So if somebody started changing multiple parts of the same part, trying to fix something just to get it out of town, we knew about it. So we said, no, we're not going to do that again because that apparently doesn't work. It hasn't worked the last 2 times you changed the same part. So we finally had gotten HPs, which were the crappiest, I think. There was something, but they just didn't do well with a Windows program, and then being out in a remote area at the airport, the Wi-Fi was horrible. Then they finally decided to give us all iPads, new generation iPads, and those were the greatest things. I mean, which was good because if you flew out of town to do a field trip to go fix something out in Europe or somewhere, you could take your little iPad with you, depending on the airplane, as long as you could keep a hard copy of the maintenance manual, the fault isolation manual inside in the iPad, you wouldn't have to worry about whether you had a Wi-Fi signal to try to make sure you could, get some information.
Timeout.
Okay, and I guess you can hear me now. I guess I must reset, right?
Yeah, we lost less than 10 seconds.
Okay. So one of the ones that I was involved with, I remember, was on a 757, and it was back when because I spent, I went from TWA to Continental, which later became United. For my first 2 years at Continental, I was a mechanic, and then the other 20 years, I was an inspector. So basically, what an inspector does in an airline is basically, as per FAA regulations, all the critical flight stuff, you're basically there to witness everything the mechanics are doing with it. Flight controls, hydraulic systems and stuff with the flight controls. Critical flight stuff. Change an engine, there's got to be an inspector there buying back everything that you watch as the mechanics do. So as a mechanic, I got involved with a 757 one night, and they wanted some documented history what actually happened here. Let me just reset. And what happened was somebody had been to a dog show, and as you know, they ship animals in the cargo compartment, and usually you can only ship them in the forward cargo compartment, not the aft, because the forward cargo compartment is the one that has the cargo heat. But they have temp sensors, and supposedly somebody's show dog froze to death on a flight that we had. So I was tasked with trying to find out and giving them all the history on why I think it all happened. So what happened was I had to kind of figure out a way, common sense wise, like my OD used to say, how am I going to test this text sensor? And the way it works is, okay, if it gets down below a certain temperature, all right, it senses and you get cargo heat. Just a big fan kicks on, and that's basically once the engines are running, they just pick off hot air from the compressor off the engine, or actually the air conditioning system. Let me just reset. So I proceeded to say, well, let me get all my tools up there, jump in there, take the panel down, and then let me go get an ice cube. rub that ice cube on that sensor, see what happens. I got that ice cube on there, nothing's going on. It says, nah, it's got it kicked on by now. It says, I've been holding it on there for a couple of minutes. Let me go get a new temp sensor, see if plug in the temp sensor, see if that's it. So I go to the stores department, which we get all parts, and I go to plug in the new one, and still doesn't work. So something's gone. So as I start tugging on the wires, it has what they call cannon plug connectors. They just screw on 2 pin connectors for this sensor, and one of the wires pulls out. So I go, wow, this wire's probably been this way since the factory or something, because I think it was a recently new delivered airplane, that one. So I proceeded to take my pin tool and push that pin back into, because they lock into a receptacle on them. And I tried it again, worked fine. So this company's not going to like this. We got to pay for this dog. It wasn't the dog that dog's fault or his health that he died from, but because the airplane, I guess that probably went to Boeing and who knows, sued who and whatever, and got the money for that. So let me just reset. And I remember about multiple parts changes looking at history, because I remember one supervisor told me one night, I remember working overtime, and I go in that night on midnight shift, and he wants me to change a spoiler actuator, which is for the flight spoilers. And it's a hydraulic actuator on this particular airplane. What it was doing, it has a spoiler module that controls the actuator and tells it what position it should be in. But the fuse it had a fuse on the inside the unit, and the fuse kept popping. So they already had changed this actuator 3 times, saying it's got to be this actuator. Well, let me just go get some jumper leads and start checking this wiring on the actuator itself, the old one, to make sure that it's not shorted out or anything. Or sure enough, it wasn't. And let me just reset. I wasn't gonna, and the reason I did this because I knew that I said to him, so I'm not gonna change this actuator until I know exactly that it is the actuator that's bad. Because I mean, it's a messy job. You get hydraulic oil all over yourself, and this thing is something they call sky draw. It's very irritating to your eyes if you get it anywhere in your eyes or in your mouth or whatever. So you didn't want to play with this if you didn't have to. So luckily, it was around morning time. One of the guys that they used to call it Rams crew, and they were like heavy troubleshooter guys. So I called this guy Jimmy over, and I said, Jimmy, I gotta take a look at this. And he had, I guess, what they call a megger with him. And he ran it through there and said, yeah, there's a short in the wire somewhere. So I can't tell where it is, but I know there is because the megger tells me that there is. It's shorting right to ground. And sure enough, I guess they routed it for checking it, and they found, I think there was a short rubbing on a clamp somewhere between the wing and the wing root by the fuselage, and they eventually got it correct. And one of my favorite ones for the last one was I've got 2 more, but I'm going to tell you one. I want to shorten it tonight. Fuel systems on a 757, and one guy, my supervisor tells me that night, 757 has, I think if I remember correctly, 6 fueling valves to fuel this month. And he proceeds to tell me, I want you to change all the fueling valves. And I'm looking at him, I says, are you crazy? This is for what reason? Well, we can't get the airplane to take fuel unless you hold the reset button. And on a 57, that's known that if you want to override fueling and get fuel on the airplane, you hold that reset button, but you got to be careful because you can spill the airplane. What they call spilling means it has vents on the wingtips, and on the wingtips they have something they call surge tanks. So while you're fueling, if I guess the manifold kind of backs up a little bit with the pressure as far as fueling the airplane, that surge tank will start to fill up. And to keep it from had, about that time, got hired on from TWA to there, and I had just finished taking 757 school. And I remember one of the things that I remembered from the fuel tanks about the system, and they talked about those piezoelectrics. So I went through the troubleshooting, and I said, I'm not changing these fueling valves because I know it's one of these two sensors, but you can't replace them because it's a tank dive. So you basically got to open up the fuel tank. You can't do it outside. You got to get it in the hangar, open up the panels, pull the sensors, and then I guess replace it one at a time, see which one's bad. Sure enough, I updated they set it up for fuel tank dive, and sure, that's what it was. They got lucky on the first try. They had, I remember 2 or 3 airplanes flying around like that. Once I explained the beauties of that system to the maintenance controller, he must have updated pretty well because all those 3 airplanes were fixed by the end of that week. So, I mean, we got all kinds of crazy stories working on airplanes for 40 plus years. So. But it was interesting while I did it, and I had good nights and bad nights. So, enough of my stories. Back to you, Neil, KD2 TVS.
Well, God, I don't have anything that complicated, that's for sure. Like as far as mechanical things. I do remember we had, and I can't remember if it was my car or a friend's car. I think it was somebody, like friends of my parents had a car that the battery kept going dead. And they didn't do a whole lot of driving. It was, the car would sit for a couple of weeks and the battery would be dead. And for some reason, whoever they were bringing it to couldn't figure it out. And, I didn't have a test meter on me. But obviously, the way you do it is, you start testing at the fuse block and see where you're getting current draw. And I remember looking over the car and thinking, what circuits could possibly still be running? Now, obviously, you can have something that's just not working correctly and just sending current right to ground. But I'm looking at everything, and I got to the trunk, and I said, "You got a light in the trunk?" And they're like, "Yeah." I said, "Do we know that it's turning off?" And they just kind of looked at me, and they're like, "No, we don't know for sure." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "We can do this 2 ways." And it was early, not even smartphone days, but, semi-smartphones. I said, we could have someone crawl in the trunk and close the trunk. I said, or let's take a video. And, I think it was like, what did I have? I had a Samsung flip phone that actually had a camera, one of those first camera phones. And it took very, very primitive video, but I took the phone and I started it recording a video and put it in the bottom of the trunk and slammed the trunk closed. And then opened the trunk up and played the video back. And sure enough, the trunk light was on. And today, we wouldn't think twice about looking at something like that. But, this was, the dawn of camera phones. And, they looked at me like I was Mr. Wizard. But their mechanic, unfortunately, didn't think of these things. I don't know. I think they switched mechanics after that. Anyway, Lou, we were watching, there was a show on one of the networks we get where they take an aviation disaster and then they go over it technically and then reconstruct the entire accident to show what happened and why. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. Let me throw it back to you for a second.
Yeah, Neil, I'm familiar with that. Actually, the story was funny. We went on a field trip to, where the hell were we? I forget where we were. But anyway, that show was on in the lobby. We were done with the airplane, and we were sitting in the lobby, and this is what we're watching. We actually ordered a couple of pictures of beer. We sat there, and we were watching that show, and there was a couple of the people that were staying at the hotel, and then watching the show, and he says, "Wait a minute, are you guys the mechanics that were working on the airplane that we were supposed to fly on and got stuck?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "And you're sitting here watching crash films." Yeah, this is all we ever think about.
All right. Yeah, I found it fascinating because some of them were, this type of thing, where it wasn't something that anybody expected. Um, there were definitely some, things that were, caused by um, maintenance mistakes or lack thereof. But there were some really interesting engineering ones that they managed to figure out exactly what happened. Um, yeah, there's definitely a lot of intelligence that goes into it on both ends. You hope it all goes in on the front end and we never need it on the back end. That's the main thing. Anyway, all right, Matt, KB2GGF, you're going to close things up here with the rounds.
Thank you, Neil. KB2GGF here. Just a quick story from my telephone repair days. That was very definitely a mechanical problem, a direct physical problem. Got a repair ticket. Someone's phone says BDR, bell doesn't ring. Okay. So I get to the address. It's an apartment building, and ring the intercom. Man says yes. I say phone company. Okay. He buzzes me in. I go up to his apartment, ring the bell, and he comes to the door, and I say, hi, telephone company. Understand your bell doesn't ring. He says, yeah, I can make calls out, but the bell doesn't ring when someone calls me. You drop it. A common problem. So I said, where's your phone? He says, oh, I only have one phone. It's in the kitchen. I said, okay. And it's a Western Electric desk set, a dial set. They made millions and millions of them. I think this one was beige, very run-of-the-mill desk set. And I said, okay. So the bell doesn't ring. So I turn it over and I look at the ringer adjust, and it's all the way up to loud. So call the operator, have her ring me back, and yep, phone doesn't ring, but I hear it very, very faintly, just going. So I said to him, how long have you had this phone? He says, well, I've had it since I moved in here 30 years ago. Okay. So, well, I got my screwdriver, flat blade screwdriver, took out the mounting screws, took the case off, and it revealed an exact 3D replica of a Western Electric desk set made entirely out of cockroaches. They were press formed into the shape of every single void inside the phone. So I said to the man, do you have a vacuum cleaner? He said, yes. I said, could you get it? You're going to need it. So we knocked all the cockroaches out of this phone, put it back together, and everything was fine. You never know what you're going to find when you use a screwdriver. KB2GGF. Back to you, Neil.
That's hilarious, amazing, and horrifying all at the same time. Oh, God. Yeah, I found some really interesting things inside of computer cases. Wow. A bug in the system. There's certainly plenty of stories out there about an actual bug in the system. Not that many bugs, but wow. Ugh. Yeesh. That's all I can say. All right, let me drop. Anybody at the end of second round here who would like to check in late and throw us a troubleshooting story or two, please come now.
In the system, huh? N3
Hey, Paul. Have a bug in the system story?
No, not really. I was just listening and figured I'd let you know. I was in the woodwork like a bug on the wall. N3
All right, Paul. Thanks for checking in. All right. Jim, wrap up comments, and probably another story, I would imagine.
Fourth for your four. Oh God, that last one rang a bell. Oh my God, when I was working for Trojan Electronics, doing field service on communications equipment and stuff like that, I would do bench repairs and stuff like that every so often as the need arises. And somebody brought a radio in, and it wasn't working, so forth and so on. And I took it apart, and it came out of a cow barn. And yeah, you wouldn't believe what it was stuffed with. Oh my God. Yeah, I can associate with that. So, anyhow, you were talking about early on with two base T networks. That rang a bell. Let me drop it a second. Back in the late 90s when I was working with ADAC, but their nuclear medicine gamma cameras, their cameras had two networks. One was an acquisition network that the heads that actually detected things connected to computers, and then there was another network where the computers connected to the rest of the network of the hospital. And the networks back then were 10 base T. They were coax, RG58U, and 10 megs, and you had to have terminations and all that properly worked through, and feed-throughs and all that kind of stuff. And basically at that point in time, I don't know if it's still true or not, but you had to have manuals in place at the facility for someone to come up and be able to repair the machine, or at least know what's going on. That was the law. So we had our manuals there. Let me drop a second. The manuals were amazing. If you followed the manuals and did the prescribed tests and diagnostics and so forth, you would bring the machine to its knees. And if you persisted on doing the test, you would do irreparable damage to the machines. And the company knew that, and they were proud of that. And we knew as field service engineers at the company that you didn't run them tests, they didn't work. So you just kind of went about your own thing and worked on what you needed to do, and got out of it in other ways. So anyhow, let's get on to cars. Back, 25, 30 years ago. A good friend of mine ran a garage and body shop in Cohoes, where I lived, and he had a Lincoln come in, and the engine was going and had all kinds of problems with it. And he did some playing around, parts changing, like you say, and the local dealership was in, and they changed out the computer and the prom and this and that and the other thing and so forth and so on. And Snap-on came in with their analyzer and tried all kinds of things and so forth, and nothing worked. Nothing came up with the solution. And I was away on travel at the time with ADAC, so when I came back, he says to me, "Hey, take a look at this, see what you can figure out." So I noticed that the light was flickering on the dome there, and so I put the oscilloscope on the battery to see what was going on. And 12-volt battery, I saw about 3 volts of noise on it. So I said, okay, you got a bad alternator. Change out the alternator, and we'll see what happens after that. Let me drop. He says, well, we changed the computer, we changed this, we changed that, and the Snap-on said it was this and that and the other. I said, well, I don't care. I know the alternator is bad. Change the alternator, and then we'll see what's going on after that. Changed the alternator, and the car snapped right up and went out the door. So Anyhow, with that, let's get on to aircraft. That's an interesting topic. Let me drop a second. So my dentist was also a private air pilot. He had his own aircraft. Started off with a single engine Piper and then went to a twin engine Comanche and so forth. And with the twin engine, he had a problem with the charging system. And he went to the normal channels and they checked it out, and they're parts changers. Well, it could be the battery, it could be the alternator, it could be the regulator. Each one back then was $1,000 part, non-returnable. So you play Russian roulette. You put this $1,000 part in, and maybe it'll solve it. If not, put the next $1,000 part in. Maybe it'll solve it. If not, the third $1,000 part in. Maybe it'll solve it. I don't know. Whatever. So I'm not registered, licensed, or certified or anything like that in airframe mechanics, but I could go over there with my meter and check. And so I did my test and said, you know what? I'd change the battery out first. So I changed the battery. Everything worked fine. And he was fine after that. And that was another bump in our dentist bills. So with that, let me give you one more aircraft story after a drop. When I worked at the Arsenal, a buddy of mine was a electrician at Griffiths Air Force Base, and he worked a lot on B-52s. And he was telling me about one time they had a situation where, well, you know how everybody's complaining about the $100 hammer and the $1,000 coffee pot. Well, they don't tell you that the coffee pot is not the standard Mr. Coffee. It is running off of 120 volts, 400 cycles, 3-phase, certified to 40,000 feet. That's not your Mr. Coffee. So, anyhow, he had a stack of coffee pots there on the board with red tags on them for repair and so forth. And this flight was going up for a full bird colonel. Let me drop. So, okay, the flight engineer is going to collect up his equipment and needs for the flight and so forth. And one of the things he needs is the coffee pot. Well, you don't want to get up to cruising altitude and have the bird ask for a cup of coffee and not be able to accommodate him. So he goes to grab a coffee pot, and well, geez, all of them have red tags on them. Well, I can't be caught up there without a cup of coffee for the bird. So he goes and yanks the red tag off of one of the coffee pots and grabs it and takes it, and they take off. And eventually they get up to full altitude, 40,000 feet, flying nice and pretty. Time to make coffee. Let me drop again. Oh, okay, as you can imagine, 120 volts, 400 cycles, 3-phase is not your standard outlet. So there's an outlet in engineering. Goes and plugs the coffee pot in, turns it on. Damn, nothing happens. Huh. Must be a bad outlet. Okay. Unplugs it, goes down to the bombardier section. Plugs it in down there. Turns it on. Son of a gun. This outlet's bad too. Alright. Well, there's one more outlet left. Goes and plugs it in between the pilot and co-pilot. Turns it on. Oh my God, 3 bad outlets. Well, no, not 3 bad outlets. 1 bad coffee pot. Let me drop it for the conclusion. Obviously, there was a severe short in no communications, no radar, no radio, no nothing. You got a B-52 at 40,000 feet flying VFR. No instrumentation whatsoever. And the only way to reset the breakers is to go outside and remove this access panel that gets the breaker box and reset them. And so that instrumented a major change in the electrical designs of the B-52 back probably about mid-60. So anyhow, that's probably my best fail story. Back to you, Neil, K2BHM.
Well, I don't think I can top that one. Oh, man. Thanks for that, Jim. And all good stuff. As I start applying my troubleshooting techniques to a whole new world, which, basic electronics, trying to figure out why things don't work in our hobby, and slowly learning. But we always have to remember to check the obvious and sometimes the not so obvious basic things first. So don't want to waste a lot of time and money only to find out that we forgot to check if the power cord was any good or anything simple like that. So I want to thank everybody for the stories and the basic theory and the list of tools. And yes, a pocket full of USB drives, and I'm not kidding. At one point, there were probably about a dozen in there. I whittled it down to the 4 major ones and then a good-sized blank one. But, a lot of you know I'm going to be out for a little while coming up. And one of the things that I had to do this past week at work was prepare a couple of my coworkers to be able to, be me, do what they can do when I'm not there, the stuff that I have to do physically. And part of that was basically cloning all of those USB-based tools so that someone else had a copy of all the things that I use. And a USB drive with some of these utilities is the equivalent of a toolkit for me. So those of you that deal with things mechanically or did for years in your various positions and jobs and careers, it's the software I carry on me is frequently what gets me out of a jam. And you got to make sure you have everything you could possibly think of, or at least that one or more of those utilities gets you to the things that you might need. Let me drop again. Sorry, thought I was going to cough there. I think that's it for us. I think we'll close things up here. And thank you, everybody, for coming. So let's close the net at 10:04 p.m. You have been listening to or participating in the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. We meet here every Sunday night at 8 p.m. on 146.805 to discuss science and technology. And not always ham radio related, but sometimes we tie it back in. But thank you for attending or observing tonight. We are also available on YouTube by searching for W2NDG Science and Technology. And we are live during the net, and the videos are archived on that channel, W2NDG Science and Technology. Please join us here on the 146.805 repeater for the other nets that occur here every morning at 8:35 a.m., the 8:35 on the 805, a roundtable net hosted by a rotating cast of OMARC characters. Just a roundtable casual net. Want to know how everybody is, trying to keep people social during these strange times where we couldn't be. And it's a great net. Just check in, tell us you're okay, see if you need anything, tell us what you're planning on doing that day. And then every evening at 6:30 is the 6:30 check-in net. A slightly more formal directed net, also run by a rotating cast of OMARC members. And the 630 net, very similar idea to the 835. Just tell us you're okay. Tell us what you did. Tell us if you need any assistance or you have any questions about anything, local area, ham radio, the club itself. But we're here for you. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. is Undernet. UNDR, or the Ulster Northern Duchess Readiness Net. This is a net talking about being ready for emergencies, being ready to use radio in the event of an emergency, what to do, what to carry, what we need to be prepared for. It gets technical, and it can be a lot of fun. We do some interesting things that radio is a good backup for in case your phones, your cell phones, and everything else, no electricity, whatever. We are here and teaching people how to survive in the event that these emergencies occur. Every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m., Paul, AC2UQ, and sometimes other backup net controls host the 80-meter Hudson Valley net. This is our first HF net we've been running. It's a check-in net at 4:30 p.m., usually on 3835 kilohertz, but may float north in frequency slightly if the frequency is in use at 4:30. But please come check in. We've been getting check-ins from a number of states, and it's becoming a popular little net. Thursday nights at 8 p.m., Dave, K2JLV, our club president, hosts the Thursday night technical net. It's a more ham radio-oriented tech net, usually talking about ham radio or ham radio computer topics. Dave takes check-ins and asks people if they have a specific thing they want to talk about, something they want to troubleshoot, problem they're having, whatever. If a topic does not develop in the first round, Dave spins the topic wheel and comes up with one for us. It's a great net, can run several rounds late into the night, and has solved several problems and taught several concepts. So join us on Thursdays. If you're curious about any of these and more things that we do at the club, we do have a lot of activities. We're a great bunch of people, very friendly. Please check us out by going to omarcclub.org, omarcclub.org, and check out our brand new website. And if you want to become a member, you can do it there. All right. We are closing the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Sunday night Science and Technology Net. I am Neil, W2NDG, broadcasting from Highland, New York. We now return the repeater to its regularly normal use, as it were. I will hang out for a little while, as I usually do, in case anybody wants to chat, but we're going to head off to bed soon. Thanks, everybody, for attending. 7-3. Have a good night.
Jim, quick question. WA2RKS.
Me, Jim? K2BHM?